The sound of metal scraping metal jolted me from my coffee. Karen, my neighbor 3 houses down, was jiggling a key in my front door lock, face flushed with rage. She called 911, declaring a security emergency because I refused her mandatory inspection. What she didn't know, the officer speeding toward us wasn't just any cop. He was my son, the county sheriff. Karma's siren was about to wail. 3 months earlier, I had moved into what I thought would be my peaceful retirement sanctuary. Maplewood Heights was everything the realtor had promised: quiet, tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and friendly neighbors. Moving here put me 20 minutes from my grandkids and my son, the county sheriff. I thought that meant safety. I had no idea how soon I'd need him. The first week went smoothly. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson brought over homemade cookies and filled me in on the neighborhood gossip. The Johnsons across the street helped me figure out the garbage pickup schedule. Everyone seemed genuinely welcoming. But then Mrs. Patterson's expression grew serious during our second chat. She glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Avoid the blue house," she whispered. "Karen runs a fake HOA. Tape measures, fines, the works." "Think she's judge and jury?" I shrugged it off. How bad could one busybody be? I was about to find out exactly how bad things could get when someone decided that common sense and basic human decency were optional. The first violation arrived like a declaration of war, a handwritten note threatening fines over grass half an inch too long, signed by Karen Mitchell, Chief Inspector, a title she invented. I laughed until the photos came. Close-ups of my recycling bins, time-stamped. This wasn't neighborly concern. It was stalking with letterhead. The next week brought more photographs, actual printed evidence of my recycling bins, taken from various angles like a crime scene. They were paper-clipped to another official-looking notice explaining that bins were only permitted at the curb between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. on collection days. The problem? I had followed those exact guidelines. Karen had photographed my bins at 5:58 a.m., claiming early placement violation. When I ignored that ridiculous complaint, Karen escalated to aesthetic violations. She sent a formal letter demanding removal of my garden gnome, a cheerful little fellow placed among the marigolds by my front walkway. According to Karen's made-up bylaws, decorative lawn ornaments were strictly prohibited as they detracted from uniform appearance and could negatively impact property values. The garden gnome complaint was the final straw. I had purchased that little guy during a weekend trip with my late wife, and he held sentimental value that no self-appointed neighborhood dictator was going to take away. I not only kept the gnome, but added a small decorative windmill beside him just to see what Karen would do next. By week 3, a 40-page community standards manual appeared on every doorstep. Grass height limits, approved hose coiling angles, gnome prohibition. She'd even created ID badges, lanyards included. That's when I realized Karen didn't just want power. She genuinely believed she had it. Her response was swift and dramatic. Karen marched up to my front door the following Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand and measuring tape dangling from her belt like some sort of suburban sheriff. She announced through the door that as the designated HOA representative, she possessed a master key to all homes for mandatory safety and aesthetic inspections. I opened the door just wide enough to see her face, set in the grim expression of someone who truly believed they held ultimate authority. She waved a brass key in front of my face, explaining that all residents were required to submit to quarterly inspections. Failure to cooperate would result in fines, liens, and potential legal action. The woman was completely serious. She actually believed she had the right to enter my home whenever she pleased, armed with nothing but her own inflated sense of importance and a key that probably opened her garden shed. I closed the door in her face and told her through the wood that she was not welcome on my property and would never be permitted inside my home under any circumstances. Karen's voice rose to a shriek as she informed me that I had just committed a serious violation of HOA regulations. For the next 2 weeks, Karen ramped up her psychological warfare to new levels of absurdity. Her violations were dystopian: $200 fines for unapproved deck stains, compliance workshops in her living room, even a camera surveilling our street 24/7. She didn't govern, she occupied. She began parking her car at the end of my driveway, taking detailed photographs of my property from every conceivable angle. The woman had clearly invested considerable time and money into her elaborate harassment campaign: professional cameras, surveyor's measuring wheel, and legitimate-looking clipboards with official forms. Karen had also recruited what she called her compliance committee, consisting of her equally delusional friend, Brenda. They conducted neighborhood patrol rounds with the intensity of federal investigators, documenting every perceived violation with cameras and clipboards. The violations grew increasingly absurd. My house numbers were mounted 1/4 inch too high, according to municipal code that existed only in Karen's imagination. My outdoor light fixture cast shadows onto the sidewalk in patterns that violated illumination guidelines she invented. Even my doormat was cited for being an unauthorized color that clashed with her approved aesthetic palette. But Karen's masterpiece came in the form of the Maplewood Heights Community Standards Manual, a thick, spiral-bound document with professional formatting, charts, and diagrams. It contained detailed specifications for everything from acceptable grass height to the precise angle at which garden hoses could be stored. According to Karen's fantasy rulebook, violations carried a graduated penalty scale: written warnings for first offenses, $50 fines for second violations, and liens against property for repeat offenders. The most serious infractions resulted in compliance hearings before the Community Standards Board, which consisted entirely of Karen and Brenda, who had awarded themselves impressive titles and created official-looking ID badges worn on lanyards. What made Karen's delusions concerning was the level of detail. She had researched actual municipal codes from other cities, weaving just enough factual information into her fantasy to make it seem plausible. She maintained detailed files on every household: photographs, measurements, and compliance records cross-referenced with her invented regulations. Karen's friend Brenda proved an enthusiastic accomplice, knocking on doors to deliver violation notices while wearing her fake ID badge and speaking in an official tone. When residents questioned her authority, she referred them to specific manual sections and threatened escalated enforcement action. The woman began showing up at my door at random times, claiming emergency inspections based on anonymous neighbor complaints. When I refused to answer, she would circle my house, peering through windows and taking notes on her ever-present clipboard. Her most audacious move was establishing mandatory community meetings in the local park pavilion. She sent official-looking invitations with agendas including compliance standards presentations and voting on new regulations. Only 3 people showed up: herself, Brenda, and poor Mr. Chen, who had misunderstood and thought it was a legitimate city council meeting. Karen proceeded to conduct the entire meeting as if the pavilion was packed with concerned residents, reading prepared remarks and calling for votes on various proposals. When Mr. Chen realized what was happening, he quietly gathered his things and left, shaking his head at the absurdity. The fake meetings became weekly occurrences, with Karen posting detailed minutes on every door afterward. Reading these documents was like entering an alternate reality where her delusions had become legally binding law. One meeting resulted in seasonal compliance requirements governing holiday decorations. Christmas lights could only be displayed between December 1st and January 15th. Halloween decorations were limited to October's final week. Any other seasonal displays required written approval from the Community Standards Board. Karen's escalating demands extended beyond decorations to outdoor activities. Lawn mowing was restricted to certain days and specific hours. Barbecuing required advance notification. Even children's outdoor play was subject to noise ordinances she had crafted. Pet ownership required registration, including vaccination records, behavioral assessments, and waste management protocols. Garden maintenance could only be performed using approved tools during designated hours, with advance notification for any noise-producing activity. Karen established aesthetic consultation services for residents wanting property changes. Any modification required submission of detailed plans for review and approval, involving multiple site visits, extensive documentation, and fees ranging from $25 for mailbox replacement approval to $200 for major modifications like deck staining. She had developed partnerships with local contractors, claiming they were the only approved vendors. These contractors allegedly paid Karen referral fees, creating a neighborhood protection racket. Residents hiring unapproved contractors faced additional fines regardless of work quality. Her most ambitious project was creating a monthly newsletter called the Maplewood Monitor, featuring compliance articles, violation spotlights, and editorials about maintaining community standards. Karen wrote every article, often including photographs of alleged violations and stern enforcement warnings. The newsletter included compliance scorecards ranking every household from A to F, with detailed violation explanations and improvement recommendations. The scorecards were humiliating and invasive, featuring specific criticisms of residents' lifestyle choices and property maintenance decisions. Karen hosted mandatory compliance improvement workshops in her home for residents with poor scorecard ratings. These featured PowerPoint presentations, regulation handouts, and homework assignments involving property improvements and compliance reporting. She installed what she claimed was a community security camera on her property, positioned to capture street activity. Karen treated this standard home security device like sophisticated surveillance equipment, reviewing footage each morning and creating detailed reports of suspicious or non-compliant activity. The surveillance expanded to compliance spot checks at random hours. Residents reported sightings of Karen lurking in bushes and hiding behind trees, conducting covert operations with flashlights after dark. The psychological impact was devastating. People stopped enjoying their yards, worried any activity might result in violation notices. Children asked why the strange lady always photographed their house. Elderly residents felt unsafe in their own community. Mrs. Patterson confided she kept curtains closed during the day, tired of Karen photographing her property. The Johnsons mentioned considering moving to escape the constant harassment. Even Mr. Chen, a 20-year resident, spoke about the good old days when neighbors respected each other's privacy. The situation reached its boiling point on a quiet Thursday afternoon in October. I was preparing lunch when I heard someone tampering with my front door lock. The metallic scratching was impossible to ignore, and my blood pressure spiked as I realized what was happening. I'd been expecting something like this. Karen's behavior had been escalating, and her repeated threats about mandatory inspections had become increasingly specific. The previous week, she'd left a final notice explaining that my continued non-compliance had reached a critical level, and the Community Standards Board had voted to authorize emergency inspection procedures. The final notice outlined what Karen called the compliance resolution process, a 72-hour grace period for voluntary compliance, followed by mandatory inspection using emergency access protocols if violations remained unaddressed. Her emergency access protocols involved her fake master key and imaginary legal authority. As I stood in my kitchen, listening to Karen's fumbling attempts to break into my home, I marveled at how completely she had lost touch with reality. She was literally attempting burglary in broad daylight, convinced her homemade authority gave her the right to violate my home and privacy. I crept to the front door and peered through the peephole, confirming my suspicions. There was Karen, crouched on my porch with her fake master key, trying desperately to force entry. She was muttering about conducting emergency inspections and teaching me lessons about HOA compliance. When I spoke through the door, informing Karen she was trespassing and I was calling police, her response wasn't what I expected. Instead of fleeing in embarrassment, she doubled down on her delusions. She stood up, brushed off her knees, and pulled out her cell phone with the confidence of someone who believed law enforcement would take her side. Karen dialed 911 with theatrical flair, her voice carrying across the neighborhood as she reported a security emergency. She told the dispatcher that a homeowner was barricading dangerous materials and refusing mandatory HOA inspection, claiming I was violating multiple safety codes and immediate police intervention was required to protect the community. I couldn't help but chuckle listening to her fabricated emergency report. Karen was painting herself as the victim and me as some dangerous criminal, all because I refused to let her play pretend government in my own home. What made the situation perfect was knowing exactly who would respond to her fraudulent emergency call. My son Michael had been county sheriff for 3 years, working his way up through the ranks with dedication and integrity that made me incredibly proud. He was exactly the kind of officer communities needed: fair, professional, and completely intolerant of people who wasted police resources with false reports. The irony was absolutely delicious. Karen had spent months terrorizing me with threats of legal action and official authority, never knowing my own son held real legal authority that could shut down her reign of terror permanently. Within minutes, I heard a patrol car pulling into my driveway. I watched through the blinds as Michael stepped out, adjusting his hat and checking his equipment with professional calm. Karen stood on my porch, arms crossed, wearing the smug expression of someone who believed justice was about to be served in her favor. The moment of recognition was priceless. Michael walked up the walkway, and Karen began launching into her prepared speech about HOA violations and uncooperative homeowners. But as he got closer, and she got a clear look at his face, her confident expression began to falter. Her voice trailed off mid-sentence as horrible realization dawned. Michael's calm, professional demeanor never wavered as he addressed Karen by name and asked her to explain the emergency call's nature. Color drained from her face as she struggled to maintain composure, clearly recognizing the situation had shifted dramatically against her. I opened my front door and stepped onto the porch, crossing my arms and enjoying the show as Karen tried salvaging her credibility. She began stammering about HOA regulations and inspection rights, waving her fake master key like some official badge of authority. Michael listened patiently as Karen spun her tale, describing me as an uncooperative resident, refusing to comply with community standards, and potentially harboring safety violations. She pulled out her clipboard, reading from her list of manufactured infractions, her voice growing more shrill and desperate with each ridiculous complaint. When Karen finished her performance, Michael asked to see her official HOA documentation and legal authority to conduct home inspections. The question hung in the air like a sword over her head. Karen fumbled through her clipboard, producing papers she claimed constituted official community bylaws and inspection protocols. Michael examined the documents with the practiced eye of someone who dealt with legal paperwork daily. After a few moments, he looked up at Karen with an expression that could have frozen lava. He informed her that not only were her documents completely fabricated and legally worthless, but her attempted entry constituted criminal trespassing and her false 911 call was a misdemeanor offense. The transformation in Karen's demeanor was remarkable. Her self-righteous indignation crumbled like a house of cards, as reality became clear. She was no longer the powerful HOA enforcer she'd pretended to be, but simply a middle-aged woman who had just committed multiple crimes in front of the county sheriff. Michael explained the legal codes Karen had violated: attempted unlawful entry, filing a false police report, impersonating an official, and harassment. Serious charges that could result in fines, community service, and jail time. As neighbors gathered on front porches to watch the spectacle unfold, Karen's humiliation became complete. As Michael cuffed her, the street erupted in cheers. Mrs. Patterson yelled, "My gnome's coming back, Karen." For years, we tiptoed around her clipboard tyranny. Now, watching her sob into the patrol car window, that silence wasn't shock. It was the sound of a neighborhood exhaling. Michael worked with professional efficiency, documenting Karen's violations and explaining the legal process that would follow. She would receive court summons for multiple charges, and any future harassment would result in additional penalties and possible restraining orders. It became clear I wasn't her only victim. People who had been intimidated into silence were now free to share their own stories of harassment and manufactured violations. The fake HOA reign of terror was officially over. Within a week, court summons arrived at Karen's door, officially charging her with criminal trespassing, filing a false police report, and impersonating an official. Additional charges were filed as prosecutors reviewed the mountain of evidence neighbors provided: fraud, extortion, forgery, and invasion of privacy. The state attorney general's office opened an investigation, discovering Karen had attempted establishing fake HOA authority in 2 previous neighborhoods. Her criminal activity stretched back 5 years, victimizing hundreds of families. Federal agencies became involved when investigators discovered Karen had used Postal Service to deliver fraudulent notices and fake legal documents. Mail fraud charges brought the possibility of federal prosecution and additional prison time. The Internal Revenue Service took interest after discovering Karen had failed to report thousands in fake fees collected from residents. Tax evasion charges were added along with penalties and interest, costing tens of thousands of dollars. Karen's friend Brenda was arrested the following week as investigators traced her involvement. She faced conspiracy, fraud, and aiding and abetting charges. The Fate Compliance Committee was revealed as a criminal conspiracy, targeting innocent families with systematic harassment and extortion. A petition circulated through the community, signed by every household except Karen's, officially rejecting any form of homeowners association and establishing clear boundaries for acceptable neighbor behavior. The transformation in neighborhood dynamics was immediate and dramatic. People began talking again, sharing meals and organizing gatherings without fear of violating imaginary regulations. Children played in yards without worried parents measuring grass height. Decorative touches returned to front porches and gardens throughout the community. As for me, I celebrated victory in the most appropriate way possible. I made a special trip to the garden center and selected a new gnome for my collection. A cheerful little fellow dressed in a miniature sheriff's uniform, complete with tiny badge and hat. I placed him right next to my original gnome, creating a small display serving as a permanent reminder of the day real authority triumphed over manufactured power. The little sheriff gnome still guards my porch. Karen's serving 18 months for mail fraud. The irony? She's in a place with real uniforms, real rules, and absolutely no decorative gnomes. Every time I look at that little sheriff gnome, I'm reminded that sometimes the best defense against bullies is simply refusing to be intimidated by their empty threats and imaginary authority. The neighborhood returned to the peaceful retirement haven I had originally sought, and Karen learned the hard way that playing pretend government comes with real consequences when actual law enforcement gets involved.